It's time for Global Africa Today, stories about Africans from around the world.
You know, that sound indicates it's just one thing here on Talk City 91.1 FM. It says that it's time now for the Indaba program. And tonight is another intense discussion, especially as we deal with the Remand yard and all that surrounds that. So let me just join the team here now with Renee and Dr. Fergus and, of course, Mr. Kambon and the rest of the gang. A very good evening to you guys.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. And good evening to the listeners on social media, YouTube and Facebook, and of course, our old listeners, our original listeners on 91.1 FM Talk City. As Ruskin said, we are continuing with last week's conversation on the prison system in Trinidad and Tobago. We have with us still our two guests from last week, Mitima Solwazi, who is the founder of the Roots Foundation. And there's a project that the program coordinator for project facilitator and the project facilitator for the Foundation's Youth Intervention Program. And also we have Mr. Gerald Gordon, who is the president of the Prison Association. We had an interesting conversation last week. I'm sure for some of us might have been a surprise, others might have been a shock, you know, particularly with respect to information on the remanded prisoners or remanded inmates in the prison system. Also, with respect to the youth, whether we are calling them offenders or delinquents, but the youth population in the prisons as well. So this evening, we would kick off with the remand situation, and may I remind you of that historical background that I spoke of last week, that the prison system is a legacy of the slavery plantation system. It's also a legacy of the indentured labor system after emancipation. I recall Eric Williams in his book, The History of Trinidad and Tobago, said that whenever an East Indian was missing, he was in either one of two places, the hospital or the prison. So it says something about, you know, that overwhelming presence of the prison and the use of the prison to control as well as to punish, to control the population as well as to punish. So we have I should say Sister Renee first, because she was here before, Sister Renee Francois.
Good night.
Brother Shabaka Kambon. I'm Claudius Fergus. We are the co-hosts for this evening's program. And as usual, let's hear some greetings from Renee and Shabaka before we bring in the guests.
Yes, hi, good night, Dr. Fergus and Shabaka. It's nice to be here with you all again. Good night and welcome to all our listeners, whether you're from Trinidad and Tobago or across the region. And I also have an understanding that we have quite listenership on the continent. They're not always able to join us live, but I understand that they do take advantage of the fact that they can go back on our YouTube page at TTT ESC or our CPAN page on Facebook and view our recordings, and they often use that as they also often use that as an opportunity as well to share their views and their comments. And as per usual, the feedback is that they love our topics, and they have a particular love for the Africa report as well.
Great. Africa Report will return next week. Yes, Shabaka.
Yes.
Well, special greetings to you, Dr. Fergus, and to you, Renee, and the rest of our colleagues at the Emancipation Support Committee. You know, we are living in extraordinary times, you know, and while tonight we will be talking about the remand yard in Trinidad and Tobago and the prison in general, we are living in a time now where things are happening in just to the north of us, in the hegemonic country of the hemisphere, that have major implications for African people there in that country, and that could have spillover consequences for us in the rest of the hemisphere. So it's I'm looking forward to interrogating those changes that are taking place.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the things we can insert into the discussion this evening, because the deportation of immigrants from the United States include persons who may have been serving time or may have completed their time, and therefore we may have to deal with that as part of the impact on our crime situation, or even within the prison system as well. So perhaps we can address that this evening as well, if we get the time. Yes, so Renee, you can bring up our guest.
Begging your pardon, I know we're very much ready to go on with this exciting topic, but I do have some news from the Secretariat.
Okay. I didn't read the running orders.
That's okay. The year has begun. I know people tend, continue to have this very misleading, idea that we only do work around June, July, August, but that's far from true. As the year starts, as a new year starts, we start planning, we start executing, and we're engaged in a lot of projects. So one of the first things we actually try to do is an annual calendar of events. It would reflect some key meetings we have with members of our community and our stakeholders. It would also have, the treasured events and dates for the Emancipation Festival. And just so people also know, one of the first events that we had this year, aside from the launch of the Youth Agricultural Project, was our first community mobilization and development meeting. It's one of the flagship projects or community engagement activities that ESCTT has been doing. And it's something that we really enjoy. I have the privilege of being the program officer responsible for this particular activity. And I do it alongside Ms. Zakia Uzuma-Wadada, our executive chair. And she's also the director responsible for this program area. And of course, I am assisted by Rain Grell, a fellow co-worker. So at this time, I just want to share with you all the calendar of events. I know it's very small, so I do apologize, but people are encouraged to visit our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and you will be able to download the same flyer here, and it provides in great detail, like I said, when we're going to have our community mobilization development meetings, when we intend to meet with national Pan-African organizations, when we want to meet with our regional organizations, because regional engagement is also very important to us here at ESC, and it's how we continue to sustain and build on our advocacy efforts. Of course, when you look at the flyer, like I said, you're going to see the dates and the various events we plan for the festival this year. And then as you continue to go through, you'll see things like the National History Quiz and our Kwanzaa Market. We do intend to cover the topic later, not too late, but soon. The fact that the second decade for people of African descent has been declared. And ESCTT would have had events when the year for people of African descent was declared in 2011. And then we would have subsequently had a number of events, including a launch, a number of conferences dedicated to educating people about the first decade for people of African descent. Our intention is to have a similar launch for the second decade. And at that time, we are actually going to report on the various activities that we at ESCTT, our national Pan-African organizations, and our regional groups have been doing in keeping with the program of activities declared as declared in the decade. So I know that later on at another Indaba program, you, Dr. Fergus, and hopefully myself will be able to delve in a bit deeper into the second decade.
Ask one question, though, Renee. One of the things that is missing for me from this program, this is 25. We have just, had a historic development in our country regarding the coat of arms, the removal of the 3 ships which celebrate represent genocide, and the replacement by our national instrument which represents freedom. This struggle goes back to the 1970s in Trinidad and Tobago. That is the root of the Emancipation Support Committee in the Black Power Revolution of 1970. It comes forward in the work that we do to celebrate and commemorate emancipation. 1984, we become the first country in the world to ditch Discovery Day because it stood in the way of our emancipation commemoration. And then throughout the 80s, we continue to work to undermine the glory of Christopher Columbus. His statue remains in town. And then that Emancipation Support Committee itself is founded in 1992 to counter the reactionary ideals and ideas that are going to come about as a consequence of the quincentennial. So this struggle to end the open glorification of Christopher Columbus is a major part of the history of our organization and our movement here in Trinidad and Tobago and across the Caribbean. And the fact that we have made history in 2025 and we don't have an event on that calendar there to discuss that history that we have made, to analyze it, to put it in its proper historical context, that concerns me. And so the next time I see that list, I need to see something that speaks to this historical development and how this is part of our own history. Emancipation Support Committee.
Of course. So we'll do. When we go back to the office tomorrow morning, I will raise it at the secretariat. And we'll put things in place and make appropriate decisions. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, to the listeners and those who are watching us, remember you can communicate with us via WhatsApp, text, or voice messages. You can leave a text message, you can send a voice message, and we are going to respond to you. If it's a voice message, we're going to play that voice back so that all of our other listeners can take it in and perhaps comment on it as well. Okay, so feel free to engage us through text messages or through voice messages.
Yes. So at this time, once Dr. Fergus and Shabaka permits, I would like to bring in our 2 guests, Mr. Mitima Solwazi and Mr. Gerald Gordon.
Okay, could you post the number on the screen for us if you can do that? Or
so the number is going across the screen as we speak. So if you want to call the studio, it's 622-4911, and for WhatsApp, it's 306-3687.
Great. So we have our returning guests on the program, and the topic is, of course, prison remand, issues of due justice, equity, due process, equity, and justice. Welcome back, Mr. Gordon and Mr. Solwazi. Welcome back.
Hi, Dr. Fergus.
Okay,
Good day.
so
Good night.
we want to plunge straight into the topic. Let me tell you that we are going to talk, first of all, about Remand, but not just Trinidad. I want you to comment on a small comparison that I'm going to make with respect to Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. Now, the statistics stand out very much when you look at Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad. I was surprised to see that the Trinidad prison population is higher than the Jamaican prison population. The data comes from the World Prison Brief online. And also the remand figure is startling. Trinidad has 60%, and you did say last week 2/3. This source says 60%, so that's pretty close to what you told us last week. But Jamaica has 22%, and Guyana 27%. But when we look at St. Lucia, the rate is much higher than let me see, I think I left out the percentage. 82%, no, that's another set of data. So when we look at the capacity of the prisons, Trinidad and Jamaica are pretty close, 80-something% capacity, which means there is no overcrowding. Guyana, however, is overcrowded by 1.5 times the capacity of the prison. So you have these little differences, but in terms of remand, Trinidad seems to outstrip these two different countries. Jamaica has about twice the population of Trinidad. Guyana is short of 1 million, and Trinidad, of course, is about 1.3, 1.4 million. Could you begin by commenting on those numbers, those figures? The what seems to be a huge variation in the prison population in Trinidad, way above in terms of remand, way above that of Jamaica, where I thought because of the reported violence and murders and so on, because I think they have a much higher murder rate than us, I expected the remand population to be a lot higher than what I'm seeing online. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, good night, Dr. Fergus and the team. What I would say is that the numbers certainly, last week flew, the time just disappeared. But I did touch on the fact that this whole issue of justice, what is justice? What does justice mean to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Is our judiciary and our criminal justice system really dispensing justice? What about the victims of crime? And when you look at the numbers, certainly the only outcome that you could think about, the only possibility for it being as it is that there is no real focus on dispensing justice for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. As long as you are comfortable, so we're talking about numbers, but let's look at the length of time. How many people, how long they spend in a position where of uncertainty, let's put it like that. So you are there for 10, 12, 15 years, 18 years, 21 years on remand. And we continue to say the judicial system is failing, the police system is failing, and then the prison is being starved for resources and being asked to treat with and hold these individuals for a protracted period of time.
Yeah, but Gordon, let me just say something here so that you can speak to it as well. Now, since we have such a long period of time before people leave the system, does it suggest that the entry and exit of people who are charged for various offenses in Jamaica and Ghana might be much faster. In other words, people are leaving the system much quicker, and therefore justice or the law, at least the judicial system, works more efficiently in these two countries. Because
Yeah,
if people are being charged and they're not leaving the system one way or the other, either through bail or through discharge in the court, it means you're going to have this pile up of people in the prisons, accounting for the 2/3. So does it say something about the efficiency with which the system operates, and whether, of course, there is some economic interests involved here to keep people in the system?
I would not deny, because I too think that there's some economic benefit being realized by some people. But further to that, it's not just the judiciary who is finding favor in these territories. Also, the police seem to be doing a much better job, because one would understand that if you have a matter before the courts, of course, there must be evidence that has to come before the court, which the police will provide. In Trinidad and Tobago, and even with our most recent thing that is currently across the news for the last few days, you see where there's an ongoing investigation. People are being detained, arrested, questioned, released. But the thing about it is that is happening to the normal person, the normal man on the street, where it seems that the burden of proof, the burden to prove, is not one that is carried well by the police service. So somebody could pull an allegation and you find yourself locked up, and then the whole judicial space then takes its time in determining your innocence or guilt, and that is just simply on an allegation. So we really need to take a very objective look at our systems and if they are working. And one of the things that I said before is that judges, magistrates, all of them are attorneys. The thing about it is that, and it's something people doesn't want to talk about it, but would I undermine a system that provides for me and my family if I have to appear in court, and every time I appear in court I am receiving fees? Am I going to undermine that with becoming more efficient when I become a magistrate? Of course, I see nothing wrong with having a matter adjourned. Of course, I see nothing wrong with having the police appear or not appear, or don't bring the evidence before the court. Of course, I see nothing wrong with that. Of course, I see nothing wrong with a matter going and dragging through the courts for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years. That comes at a cost. There's also a cost to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that cost is, yes, it's financial in that we have to feed, take care of their medical care and all these sorts of things. But there's also a cost that we feel as the people, where you are helpless in a society where you never feel that you get any justice. And that is why you see people getting so frustrated, and people not having a problem with extrajudicial killings, and people not having a problem with the neighborhood. We catch the bandit, so we beat him half to death. We don't have a problem with that, because to go the other way, it doesn't provide any satisfaction to the victims of crime in our country. And that is a conversation that it appears that the authorities are not willing to have.
Okay, Mr. Solwazi, over 95% of inmates are male in the prison system from the data online. And this data is provided by the government. How does that impact on your foundation's work, the work that you do, knowing that basically the prison is predominantly a place for incarcerating men. Just about 3 to 5%, 3-4% are women.
So, good evening, Dr. Fergus and Gerald and the audience. So, we have been looking at that for a while, and off air, Sister Zakia was asking me, how is my schedule for next week? And I told her that Donald Trump freed up my schedule, freed up my calendar, because this week we had 2 projects that was to start, but it got slashed with the executive orders. And one was called Make It a 30. And Make It a 30 targeted young men between the ages of 15 and 29, right? Because not just they are the highest population in prison, they are the highest population within homicides, and also so they are the victims and also the perpetrators of homicide, right? And the other program we got slashed was building resilient youth against gangs. So that alarming figure within the prison system is disturbing, right? We have to ask ourselves why our young men are being driven down that road or being led down that road. And I think this is creating some context to answer that question, seeing that you brought in St. Lucia, Jamaica earlier in your opening. I've been in Antigua in December last year to do our boys program. And to my surprise, now we have been hearing this all the time, but you have to be in these countries to witness it. 6 and 7 has become the dominant gangs in Antigua. I was in St. Lucia earlier this year. 6 and 7 are the dominant gangs in St. Lucia. And we ask ourselves, how come that violent culture has been exported to the region? And I was in an interview again about 2 weeks ago, speaking to a gentleman from Guyana who was the ambassador in the US, Guyana. And he said in 1977, he was in the UK studying and he experienced xenophobia, right? He said, but it did not affect him because, and this is what he said, they could have never beaten cricket. And he spoke about a regional pride. Dr. Fergus, that is beyond my time. I was 5 years old in 1977, so I don't know of that regional pride you guys felt back in that era. And that is what I think is missing, that our young men and young women in some cases, or most cases also, don't have this pride, this local pride, this regional pride, so we could commit to homicide, we could, just fully guns, fully evil, right? And I think that is the problem. We have to find a way, because we don't have that cricket pride again. We don't have it, right? So what do we have? A Trinidad pride, a Trinidad genre pride, because that is what has overtaken the region. And we all know nature abhors a vacuum. So we have a vacuum locally, right? And now in the region, you quoted some figures for Guyana, I think it's St. Lucia, Jamaica. So we have this regional problem where our young people are not holding on to anything of substance, right? I always tell young people, you see that door? When you look at the door, you're seeing the sign enter. When I look at that same door, I am seeing the sign exit. And we have a duty that when we exit that door, we leave something for these young people to enter, right? That is why we have a high population of our young men in the prison system, a high population of our young men being victims of homicide and perpetrators of homicide.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper in the question of what really accounts for the overwhelmingly large proportion of inmates being on remand before I bring in Shabaka. In terms of due process, Mr. Gordon, to what extent is due process observed or not observed as a reason for these young men in particular, because the vast majority are young men, being in the prison system for 21 years? What is really wrong? Because it is something difficult to swallow. What is really wrong with the system that you can have an individual over 10 years, 10 to 21 years without really not that they're not being taken to court, because as we know, that's a business in its own right.
Correct.
But the court matters seem not to even start in some instances. They're just taken back and forth and have the cases adjourned and adjourned and adjourned and adjourned. Either the police not there, the witness
not ready.
And this week current problem. Could you just explore that a little bit for us, and then we'll bring in Shabaka.
Dr. Fergus,
okay, so I will. Gerald, yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. Yes.
Dr. Fergus, let me give you a quick anecdote, and Gerald could come in. In 2013, a young man from our community was arrested for murder, and he was going to court. I think it's every 28 days. I think Gerald back and forth.
Correct.
And
Correct.
every time he goes to court, right, he comes back. He said, "Brother Mitima, I'm going to." So he might say, "Brother Mitima, I'm going to court Friday. I'm going home." And I say, "No, you're not going home." I say, "Well." I didn't know how to answer, and every time, and I told my wife, I said, this little boy, he was 15 years old. I said, he don't understand.
No.
He spent the rest of his natural life in prison, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Fergus, they were released last year. I'm talking about, it was 2013. So he sat there for over 10 years. Back and forth. Gerald, the floor is yours.
Yes. So let me get some.
Yeah, and that is part of the lost generation, that we have in Calypso as well. Eh? Go ahead, Gerald.
The thing that we mentioned before we came on, we were talking about another topic, and I was talking about as a people, we don't take responsibility. Collective responsibility for where we are. It's always somebody else's problem. It's not me, it's them. It's not we, it is them. It's never me. I am separate, and to me, when I look at it, that is how the judiciary seems to me. You see, I remember working at the maximum security prison virtual court, and I started the process of checking how many matters were we facilitated. And in 1 month, we facilitated 1,784 matters in 1 month. That is for the both High Court and the Magistrate Court. You hear the numbers, and that is one single facility. We are counting Port of Spain Prison. We're not counting ECRC. We're not counting women's prison. We're not counting the youth training. We're not so that is the sheer number of cases. And when you sit down and you listen to what is happening, if you don't have an attorney, 9 times out of 10, this matter is going to be adjourned. If the prosecutor is not ready to proceed, it's an adjournment. They would have sent evidence samples to Forensic Science Center. That is another issue. Just the sheer number of samples that they have to treat with. They're not ready to treat with the case because they haven't gotten back the results. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And what I'm saying is that in other jurisdictions where the burden of proof is on the state, they say that if the state is unable to prove its case in 1 calendar year, then the person must be released. If it's a capital offense, something like murder, they give the state up to 3 years. But in Trinidad, they seem to have an infinite amount of time. You have you have the prosecutor, police prosecutor who may be retired. Then you don't know where the file gone on, who he passed the file on to. If it's a capital offense, it's a similar thing that happens. And you know, in terms what was mentioned just now about the young guy, 2013. You know, I was there on the scene where an inmate would have committed suicide. And when we were trying to figure out, well, what it is happened. So he would have been in the remand, I think, for about 7 years, going to court and whatnot, you know, in the low court and whatever. And then he got his date to go to the high court, to the assizes. But the date was more than a year away. And the other inmates reported to us that he went into a depression. He went into a depression and he hung himself from the cell gate. And now you know the kind of despair one would have to be in. That all you have to do is put your foot down. That's all you have to do. He didn't jump from a height. He strangled himself from the gate. And all he had to do to save himself was put his foot down, and he refused to do that. That is the level of despair that is, and now we will never know if he was innocent or if he was guilty. The victims of that crime for which he would have been arrested and charged and placed in the prison, they too will never have any closure. So the thing about it is that I am saying this, that we need to truly start to take collective responsibility as a people for where we are, understanding that it is not the ideal. We're so far away from it, it's not even funny. We need to stop accepting from the judiciary and judicial officers and the police service all of these excuses. Do we need more magistrates? Do we need to set up special courts? What do we need to do to ensure that we can have justice touch the lives of each and every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago so that people could feel safe? Because the thing about it is that, and I'm going back to something I said before, because it's stuck in my head while talking to another, a retired police officer, a good friend of mine, and he said, justice only exists when the crime never happens again. But as long as we have crime, as long as we have victims, and as long as we have a system that through its inaction or slow action continues to perpetuate the system that we continue to suffer under, we are not going to ever be able to truly say that we feel safe, that we feel secure as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, as long as this system continues to do what it's doing, which I call its abuse. We are being abused by the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago, each and every one of us.
Over to you, Shabaka.
Well, let me say that it is not surprising to hear the degree of injustice that exists in the system today, or to learn about it, considering the history which Dr. Fergus has so, has taken the time to share with us. You know, the prison system comes about at a time when we are not considered full human beings, and perhaps in that context, you know, there was no rush to confer rights upon us, the majority of the population, those who would be likely to be incarcerated. And so therefore, it's not really a surprise that up to today, those people who are brought into the system are still not treated as full human beings in that system. I just want to share something that we haven't touched on yet, which is the fact that the oversight institutions are also very weak. They are, and I think perhaps they are deliberately kept weak. And the people who go into those to lead those oversight institutions they do not see it as their responsibility to do their jobs. In fact, they see it as their responsibility not to rock the boat. And I can tell you, and I don't want to call any name, but I had the opportunity to work for some time in the office of the ombudsman. And while I was there, one of those cases came across our desk. A gentleman wrote to us from Remand, explaining that he was innocent and that his case was not being treated well, and he had been there something like 13 years when he wrote to us. And I can tell you that I personally, I felt the pain for this gentleman. I put myself in his shoes, and of course, I would not have wanted to sit in such a circumstance for that length of time. And so I took the case personally to the incumbent at the time, and the answer was, please, I don't want it to ever be known that you showed me this case. We don't want to rock the boat. And I'll give you another example, because these are all related, right? So when you had the scandal erupting in the country some years ago, related to the abuse that was taking place at all the homes for children, when you get into trouble, you go to that one in Diego Martin and in the other places. The
Boys Industrial.
Regarding that, the abuses that took place in those institutions would have come to organizations like the Ombudsman's Office before it was made public. It would have gone to other oversight institutions. There was one in the ministry and other oversight institutions in the government. None of those institutions would have taken action until it became a public scandal. And then, even then, when you look at those actions, a lot of those actions were really about damage control.
Yes.
To say that, something to mitigate the damage that would be done to the political party that was in charge at the time and other people who were in senior positions. The real thrust of the matter, and I can tell you again, the information, and this, I'm not making this up now, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I was aware of what was going on in those institutions before it made it to the papers. I tried again to get the oversight bodies to act in that time. And there was that blank response from those in authority. Again, they did not want to touch something that they felt there was going to be messy, that was going to be challenging. I could tell you that in some oversight institutions, and again, the Ombudsman's Office is my personal experience, you would have had people working in there who refused to go into the communities where such a service was needed. And of course, the kinds of things that they could address would result in all kinds of criminal proceedings for some people in the long run. And so we have a society that is simply not mature enough yet to really address, to give the energy that is needed to create more humane and just and equal criminal justice system. And of course, the discourse in the society around crime is such that anyone who champions the rights of the incarcerated, whether they're on remand and not yet still innocent, or those who are in the system who have gone through the courts and are serving their time justly, even those things are not being addressed. And now I can speak from a different hat. I worked in the regional crime and security framework, and I can tell you we had we would bring in these international experts on prison reform, and they would come and do seminars in different countries across the region for prison chiefs and so on from across the region. And I recall sitting and having chats with them after these functions, and they would invariably ask me why the prison, the directors of prisons and so on in the Caribbean, I don't forget the terminology. What's the terminology for someone who's in charge of the prison system?
Commissioners.
The commissioners. Why the commissioners would not ask questions when they were finished with their presentation. you know. And what I remember one guy from Europe, you know, saying to me in the corridors of a meeting that it was the strangest experience he had ever had, because in no jurisdiction that he had been to around the world had he gone and met people of that seniority and nobody asked a single question. And he felt that it was either that something was wrong with his presentation, or that there was among the population who was assembled, those who had come to witness the presentation, no desire to reform the institutions that they govern. And so we do have real problems. And of course, I could go on and give more specific instances, but I don't. You guys are doing a great job of that. But, you know, I want to ask you to go back to revisit, just for the purpose of the audience who weren't here last week, the disparities along lines of race that exist within the system. Brother Gordon, could you just speak to that? And of course, Brother Mitima, if you could also weigh in on what you have seen.
Yeah.
Mitima, you want to go first?
Well, I wanted to because you spoke about the situation with the suicide. And
yes.
something I noticed whilst I was at the volunteering at the YTC, now YTRC, is that, and probably you could chime in also, Gerald, a lot of the young men started to plead guilty.
We have that.
Or not, right? Shabaka and Dr. Fergus, it was crazy. And I asked him, I say, why are you pleading guilty? Here the response: I will serve less time than being on remand. I said, but you will have a record against your name. And they say they were willing to take that risk. And Dr. Fergus and Shabaka, that period, Gerald, a whole heap of young. Now, I was placed in a real difficult situation, because here I am in the free world telling a man, don't try, right? Stay on remand. And as we see, you can spend more than 10 years on remand. And a lot of them pleaded guilty, and they got a lesser sentence.
Well, let me just say this, Mitima, just to add, you know, one of the things we did research on when I was in crime and security was the question of indefinite detention. That's one of the things that I personally investigated. And we found that indefinite detention is equal to torture. It's a form of torture. So when you are in jail and you have no idea the length of your stay, the impact of that on your psyche is much worse than if you have even a long sentence in jail, that you could prepare your mind to see that through. So, you know, and of course, when we talk about indefinite detention, we're not just talking about those on remand. We're talking about people who are undocumented migrants who found themselves in similar circumstances. There is an appetite within our state infrastructure to leave people in indefinite detention for enormous amounts of time. And there's another case that was taken up by the Emancipation Support Committee. I just want to mention it because our organization was actively involved, where a young man came in from Sierra Leone on a boat, found himself in Port of Spain, was picked up by the police and was moved from one jail to the next, one adult prison to the next. And when he tried to commit suicide on the second or third occasion, they beat the devil out of him so badly that it damaged his hearing. And so that when he was, by the time we were able to get him out of that unjust circumstance, he had committed no crime in this country, his hearing just gradually deteriorated until today he cannot hear a single thing. And guess what? His profession is music. So he went on to become a talented recording artist and gradually lost his hearing, couldn't even hear his own music before. Up to today, he cannot hear a single thing. So this
let me touch on
personally. I know.
Let me touch on the issue with race. Certainly, we have a high number of individuals of African descent behind the walls. And if anybody could see that, as we just say, Ray Charles could see that if he was still around.
What is the percentage, brother? What is the difference in percentage?
I don't want to give a percentage, but if Don't hold me to it, but I am thinking probably in the 80s. Probably in the low 80s, high 70s percentile of individuals like that of African heritage. And I always think about the history of Port of Spain prison. And I remember when I was making calls for it to be closed, because Port of Spain prison was really where they used to house the slaves who used to work on that big plantation, which is now down that area, Queen's Park, Savannah, going all up to Maraval, Belmont, and all that area used to be plantation. And the slave owner's home is where, on that corner where the museum is. That is what that was the house of the slave owner. And they used to, when somebody ran, when they ran away, they never used to look for them. What they would do is that they will take anybody, any of the remaining slaves, anybody who didn't run, and they would torture them and they will hang them outside the walls of that same Port of Spain prison. Remnants of those poles that they would hang the inmates from are still there. Not the inmates, the slaves are still there. The bell that they used to ring at the end of the day to indicate, okay, it's a cease labor, and for them to bring their slaves, their teams or whatever inside, that bell is still there at Port of Spain prison more than 200 years after the fact. So the thing about it is that not only have we held on to that ideology, but we actually are holding on to the vestiges. I know we spoke earlier about the coat of arms and the 3 ships and replacing it with the steel pan and Christopher Columbus statue down the road. But one of those things that we never focus on is that Port of Spain prison and what that represents to the African diaspora in this part of the world. I'm not even saying in Trinidad and Tobago alone, because of the atrocities which were foisted upon slaves at that point in time. And it would appear that, they say things change with time, but things have not really changed that much. It's just that now the torture is different, as Shabaka was explaining. You understand? That we now have no issue with holding people indefinitely. There's nothing wrong with that. And one of the things that I often hope that somebody challenges this system. This cannot be something that we continue to accept as a modern society, as one where we talk about people being so enlightened and having information, and we're so educated. So on one side, we are celebrating these achievements, so-called achievements, and then on the next hand, we're holding on to these vestiges that are certainly not serving us in any way. Just today I was talking about modern correctional infrastructure and infrastructural design, and how it's supposed to be an enabler. It's supposed to be an enabler for the staff, where they could interact with the incarcerated in an environment that lends to improvement and change, and also provides an opportunity for the incarcerated to be able to access programs and access services and access their families, so that at the end of the day, what we have constantly found ourselves doing is we have pulled that whole slave mentality and the way that we treat slaves, and we have brought it into the modern, we have dragged it, I have to say, over all those years. And it still persists today. And we seem clueless as to how to stop it. But I am thinking that a very clear message ought to be sent to the state, to the judiciary, that we are not getting into who is innocent and who is guilty. That is not what we're getting into. What we are saying, however, is that is that the current system is not serving the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is not serving the incarcerated. It is not serving the officers who have to treat with that situation in that environment. It is not serving the victims, and it is not serving the citizenry in any way. Is it treating with the issues of crime and criminality? And on that point, I want to say too, we always want to know, I think Mitima was touching on it, what brings about why crime and why these young men won't find themselves in crime. What is it? And I am saying that by 10, 11, 12, 13, we are losing our young men. And there is something that people don't talk about. But you see, the system under which we operate, and we're dealing with absenteeism. We're dealing with I call it toxic motherhood, and I call it toxic motherhood in the sense that I don't need no man. I go raise my children myself, and you find out that there is a lot of socializing opportunities that young men are missing out on. And so the building blocks of what it truly means to be a man, what it truly means to contribute, what it truly means to build something, what it means to give to your community, that community spirit. I remember, I'm not that old.
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second, because there is a tendency in recent times to try to implicate the parents of offenders, in their crimes, and there've been calls from members of the public, Dr. Fergus, I'm sure you're aware, for parents to face some legal penalty when their children offend. I'm sure you all have heard those calls, everybody here on this call. And I think that it is important for us to understand the issues that affect our communities are not issues of some inherent culture among the people that live in those communities. They are issues of leadership. They come from the top, from the lead politician in the country, the people who are supposed to find the solutions, those in the oversight bodies, those who are responsible for the institutions that serve those communities. Those are the people responsible for the culture you see in those communities. It's not something that comes from the people. So when we talk about toxic motherhood, absentee fathers, and so on, we know from looking at other jurisdictions that you could change a very minor law and it could result in 50-60% of fathers in a particular community suddenly leaving their homes, or it becoming more difficult for fathers to stay in a home. For example, you remove the question of employment. You take a factory that is based in a particular community, where the men in that community work in that factory and bring home the bread for their families. You remove that factory from that jurisdiction to another part of the country or to another country, and you find suddenly, within a short period of time, most of those men are no longer in their homes. These are the kinds of things so there are many factors that result in the challenges that our people face. Another one I want to mention when it comes to crime, which is really important, is the question of food poverty, right? Food insecurity. Because again, in my time in crime and security, we learned that the impact of nutrition at the early stages of a child, I think between 3 and 9 years old, is huge in terms of them developing their moral compass, and them being able to live fruitful and productive lives, fully developed as human beings. That's something that, again, the leadership in this country has not wanted to acknowledge the degree to which people below a particular sector in the society are suffering from food insecurity and, in fact, food poverty, and resulting in malnourishment and stunted growth. And of course, anybody here who spends any time in any of the so-called hotspots will know, you will walk into those communities and ask a child, How old are you? And you're expecting to hear the child say 8 or 9, and they tell you 14, right? And they are 14 years. They don't look their age because the nutrition has not been there for them to develop the way
But
that they should.
Shabaka,
Okay, before you
one of
continue, just in case the listeners on 91.1 are leaving us at this time, we want to say good night to them. Thanks for listening and see you next week. But hopefully, if you can continue to listen, that would be great because this is an important topic. I don't know if Ruskin would allow you to continue to listen, but we would appreciate that very much if he does. But hours up, and we need to say good night to them if they're leaving us. So back to you.
Yeah, let me just raise another question that Brother Mitima raised. The question of pride of the young people. And I think pride can stand in there for a number of adjectives that we might use to refer to a community's sense of itself, its own capacity, and how a community, the things that underpin a community driving itself forward. So Dr. Fergus would have spoken on this program several times. Dr. Tony Martin came on and gave a series of presentations on the program, also going back to the beginning of the 20th century. And he spoke on one occasion about an African mother in town who wasn't averse to doing a little predial larceny to ensure that she could find the money to buy the school clothes and the books and so on to send her kids to school. There was that determination. And of course, those children who went to school half-clad and so on became top lawyers and doctors, and they're from communities like Belmont. Now, a lot of them have moved out of those communities. But there was that drive. And you talk about it in terms of pride. But what we have found is that, and in my interaction, because I do a lot of lectures in schools, I find more and more teachers tell me, whatever you're going to talk about is too complex for my kids. These kids ain't reached that level. They can't understand those subjects. They can't understand those topics. And you need to simplify it and just tell them to stay out of crime and so on. So we are actually now I'm actually beginning to see a state where the teachers, the parents, the community leaders now begin to consider that their kids are somehow handicapped, incapable of competing, incapable of learning, incapable of really going, of becoming real, shapers and makers of society. And from a very young age, they've already lost any confidence in these kids. Now you go back a few decades, when our people you had illiterate parents, because the colonials left us here 80% illiterate across the Caribbean. So you have a lot of illiteracy, and you have parents who can't read and write, and they're determined that their kids are going to become something. They're going to make something of themselves in the education system. And they know that those teachers that they're sending those kids to are equally determined. Now, where do you find that in Trinidad and Tobago? In other communities outside of the African community. That drive, that energy, that feeling, that belief is there. It is not in our communities. And we have to ask ourselves where we went wrong, and we have to hold our leaders responsible for the crisis that we are seeing today. From the failed education system straight to the prisons, and of course resulting in the kind of disparities that we see today, that you guys, Gordon and Solwazi, are witnessing in the prisons.
And one of the things I often say, Shabaka, is this: you could judge a society by how it treats the less fortunate. And I think that is very clear in our experience. And I doesn't like to teach I like to always speak about the ability to get those opportunities. And you touched on it there, and I think it is very important, that belief that you spoke about, that the parents being illiterate, but they have this belief and this stick-to-itiveness that their children must not be like them. But they also had the support of the school and the teachers saying, hey, you all could make it, you all could be better than you all are. And I mean, you said it there, and it really kind of sent me back thinking about, even when I was going to school, and how the teachers were so involved with our development. And it really is a point. I think it's a point in our history where we really have to ask those questions, gentlemen.
I have to tell you, you have said, I mean, what you just said there is so profound. That quote that you judge a society by how it treats its less fortunate. And I have to wonder, and I'm playing with this idea now, whether or not we have replicated the whiteness and blackness that we inherited from the colonial period in a new form, where some people who live above a particular level live a kind of white privilege, and those who live below a particular level live a state of blackness. Because when I see a roadblock and I see how police treat those boys and girls who come from less privileged backgrounds, and I've been personally witness to some bizarre, and I'm going to mention one tonight. There was an attorney. I was at a party, and one night a young, light-skinned young man left the party. He had been indulging in alcohol and perhaps other drugs in the event at this in this mansion in one of the elite corners of Trinidad and Tobago. And he left and he jumped into his brand new sports car. And we heard his tires screech as he left the event. Shortly after that, we heard a loud bang. And we knew that he had reached the main road, a block away from the event. And we weren't sure what happened. But a few minutes later, he returned to the party, this young man of privilege. And he went straight to an attorney, an African attorney inside the party. I saw him run past me, and he went straight to this attorney, and he said, "What do I do? I am inebriated, and I am high, and I have just crashed my car, and it's in the middle of the main road. I left it, and I came back to the party because I needed legal advice." And I remember straining my ears to overhear the advice that this African attorney gave to this 1%er. He said, "Listen to me. Don't go back for your car. Stay and enjoy the rest of the party." He said, "The police will come, they will move your car, and tomorrow you will go to the police station and you will tell them that you feared for your life. We got in an accident in an African in a bad neighborhood,
in a hot spot.
Feared for your life, so you had to leave your car there, and you'll go back tomorrow morning. Try your best to sober up as best as you can when you go to the police station." And he told them, he said, "They will not check you for drugs and alcohol tomorrow, so you don't have to worry because of the class and the color of your skin." He told him that in the party in front of me. And I called that attorney a week later to ask him how it went. He said it went exactly as he thought it would. And that's because he knows this society. And I could give you many more instances like that. This is what the society that we have inherited, and it's something we have to look at very critically. It's why we remove the monuments from the ships, the 3 ships from the coat of arms. It's why we try to remove Columbus, Picton, Abercrombie, because we want people to start to reflect on the colonial violence of our past and to try to come to terms with it in a way that could move the society to a more just space in the future.
Let me jump in at this point. I want to ask a very important question. We haven't touched on that aspect, but before I do that, I just want to comment on Gordon's reference to the prison and the violent artifacts they have there. Just last night, Shabaka and I were talking about the slavery era, that in Trinidad somehow there seems to be no remains of the evidence of the violence perpetrated against Africans. And here we are discussing the prison system, and those contraptions are right inside the prison still, coming out of the slavery system, which reminds me, of the statement I started with last week. The prison system is a ghost of the plantation colonial past, but with all the structures intact. Now, let me shift the conversation a little bit now. There are thousands of people inside of the prisons who are not inmates. And that is people like yourself, the officers. You look surprised. Yes, the officers I'm talking about. Right? Now, the prison is a place of violence, it's a place of coercion, and prisoners or prison officers must be tough people. Otherwise, there might be consequences for not being tough, or at least to show that you are tougher than, especially the very violent, the difficult prisoners or inmates. Now, you work there every day, sometimes, as far as I understand it, 24-hour shifts and so on. Then you have to go home into another kind of environment, an environment that is supposed to be one of love and peace and so on. How does that affect the officer in his relationship to his wife, his children, and so on when he gets home? You know, what provisions are there within the system to sort of take that stress down into safer levels before the officer goes home, or when he goes home, whether he has to go into his own personal sanctuary to take that, that anger, that stress, the kind of power play that you must demonstrate inside of the prisons, in order to ensure your own safety at times, and perhaps the safety of the other inmates as well. What provisions are there in the system to ensure that the stress we talk about that could lead to suicide in the prison doesn't affect officers in the same way, where perhaps it might also lead to suicide or violence committed against family members and friends and so on? Could you deal with that?
There is nothing. There is nothing written. There is no clear policy. Just last year, we lost 24 officers in active duty, and for various reasons, heart attack, strokes, cancer. We also have lost some officers over the years due to suicide also. Just on Friday gone, a female officer would have collapsed on the job. She got a massive, it was a thing they say, a brain aneurysm. She passed away on Saturday. We have officers who are not seeing their 60th birthday. If you never get promoted into the first division, which is from assistant superintendent up, what we are seeing is that officers are never even reaching the point to receive their NIS benefit. The place is diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer of all the various types, afflicting officers coming and going. And we know it's a direct result of the amount of stress that you are constantly under. The other thing that is affecting officers greatly too, besides the natural, well, I like to say the natural and natural deaths that are happening, is the number of murders that have occurred over the years. So there's a lot of trauma that officers have experienced that have never been dealt with or treated with. Currently, we have a issue with officers when they come under threat. And sometimes they have to be taken out of their home, sometimes with their families. There is no place really to put them. We have had officers who were sleeping and living in the prison dormitory. We had one who did that until he retired. We have officers who are homeless. It is a thing where we are generally ignored, and we are ignored to the point that is every man for themselves. So you would have, the prison administration would have hired, I think, 5 psychologists for both inmates and officers. I know there are some officers who utilize the services, but with just over probably, let's say, about 3,300 prison officers, and you have 4,000 odd inmates, and you only have 5 psychologists, I don't need to explain to you the challenges that they themselves face in attempting to try and deal with the situation or situations that may present themselves from time to time.
Let's ask Dr. Fergus this question. Dr. Fergus, do you see a relationship between the way prison officers are treated based on Brother Gordon's comments and the way that prisoners are being treated? Is there perhaps a historical genesis for both?
Well, I can't answer that question. That'll be speculation. No, that'll be speculation. I can't speculate, but if our guests do that speculation for us, perhaps he might be able to have an opinion on it.
No, well, it's interesting that you asked that question to Gordon, because at my time at YTC, now YTRC, I took a decision that whenever, because I never asked the prison for, and Gerald, I never asked you for anything to support my programs at YTC, our programs, right?
Right.
We will use our own funds, and that from sponsors and supporters. And whenever we catering food, so I would have I call them my boys. These are the ones who, let's say, are Muslims or who involved in spoken word poetry.
Yes.
Whenever we feeding or dealing with food, we feed the entire prison, the entire YTC population, and Dr. Fergus and Shabaka, the prison officers. I ensure when we bring food into the system, we cater for prison officers, because what I don't want, because when we cater, we going way out there, right? So I don't want no prison officer to be helping us shout food and working a nice macaroni pie and this and that, and they don't have. So I ensure, I always tell the superintendent in charge, I need the figures of the officers who will be working this shift, and I cater for them. And what I also do, now there's a saying, now Gerald is probably a prison saying, they call them destitutes. They are prisoners who have nobody.
They are nobody.
Right?
Yeah, nobody.
I ensure they get 2 boxes of food.
Yeah.
I ensure that all, and who helped me with that is the lads, Gerald, in YTRC. Because they will know, I said, listen, in each of your dorms, I need to know how much destitutes it have. And they say, Mitima, this fellow here, he have nobody to visit him. He get 2 boxes of food. So that question they asked is so important, because, and Gerald said it, the prison officers are forgotten, right? And I always say this, Gerald, you'll also serve time. Shabaka has a question, so I'm not speculating, Dr. Fergus, but
yeah, you know,
they also serve time, because when they clock in, right, whatever takes place in the prison affects them. When I am there, I have a lockdown. Hello, I lockdown too, you know. Many times, I in the library having a project, and I hear lockdown. They come and they take out all the lads, they put them back into the dorms, and I stay in the library with a prison officer by the door. I can't leave, right? So I am locked down too. So Gerald is locked down, we never locked down, right? The phone jammers also affect Gerald, right? So they undergo some of the same experiences, pains, whatever, that the prisoners undergo, because they are in that system. So that was
really.
question,
I know Dr. Fergus didn't want to venture there, but I will venture there. I would say yes, Shabaka. Prison officers, the treatment that we receive, the lack of consideration, the lack of understanding as to what we have to endure. I mean, Mitima talk about the jammers. During COVID, watch me, when you think about some of these things, during COVID, of course, we being essential, we have to come to work. Remember, this is a time of kind of lockdown and whatnot. People were leaving their children at home, unsupervised. Officers were doing that. And imagine you're in the jail, you can't use your phone because of the jammers. Yeah. And you know what? You would see officers going out into the car park, in the far reaches of the car park. You'll see they plug on their laptop or they're on their phone and they're doing homework. When they get a little break, they're doing homework with the child in the car park. If something happened to your family and you working in one of those facilities where those jammers are active and whatnot, it's hell to find you, because the place so big, they might only have a limited amount of lines. You might want to call out to your family, you can't. So, and that is what we have to endure. Look, a simple thing as getting a meal. It might seem thing, but you walk with your food. I always remember as a young officer, I worked at the first Christmas I ever worked. That is Christmas Day into Boxing Day. And I was home at that point in time, and mommy prepared a nice meal. If you see my bowl, my kalaloo and my Christmas rice and all these niceties. But the place was short. We didn't have enough officers. So we came down. Parade is 12:55 p.m. Took over, and we didn't leave there until 11 p.m. the night to come up to the dormitory to get a little rest to go back down in the morning. And I left my food out because it's fresh food. I thinking, well, I will get a little break and I'll be able to come and eat. The kalaloo bubbling in the bowl and it cold. So all my food spoiled. And, it may seem insignificant, but that is a big thing. Yeah. Because guys, remember, it's you understand? So we hear you, brother. We hear you. We have a whole lot of issues surrounding. Because you remember, I spoke earlier about the correctional infrastructure and design and how you design the space to facilitate certain things.
All that's part of it. We're coming down to the end of our time now.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's important for us to touch on two quick issues. I just want to get your comments on two things. One, I think it's important for our audience to understand, and that's why I'm going to put this question to both of you gentlemen, and you have to answer it as quickly as you can. How an unjust criminal justice system contributes to more criminality, and therefore to a lower standard of living for the entire population. Just your comment on that, each one of you. And then lastly, how can organizations, what would an organization like the Emancipation Support Committee, be required to do at a time like this to advance the cause of justice? Two questions.
Let me interject, and with those responses, could you make your closing comments with them as well?
Okay, so what I will say is that how does it contribute to crime? I like to use living examples. Currently, there's an inmate, he's due to come out. I have known him my entire service. He would have been on remand, he went across, he served his time, and he is supposed to be out in 6 weeks. He will be out. He has no body. He has no parents. His parents died while he was incarcerated. He has no brothers or sisters or siblings living, and he is begging every time he sees me, Mr. Gordon, you don't know anybody, it's how anybody thing, because he has nowhere to go. When he is released, he is going to be on the streets. And part of the thing, I know we touched on it briefly, was this whole issue of aftercare. And I'm saying that unless because what is the purpose of the incarceration? If the purpose of the incarceration is simply to remove the individual away from society for a period of time, we feel it. Incarceration should really be for us to provide an opportunity to change the life of that individual so that they could then come back out and contribute positively to nation building. And if we're not doing that, we fail it.
Yeah, and brother Gordon, the second part of question. What should the Emancipation Support Committee, if we wanted to declare the dividend of energy in support of justice, where would we best put our efforts?
Ooh, I would say a lot of advocacy as it relates to the judiciary and and policing, but I would also say getting more involved in the prison. Yes, we have a lot of challenges and limits and whatnot, but I think once some of these inmates see that they have support and real support in helping them to focus on what they are going to do when they finally do leave, and showing them the way, providing opportunities for employment, simple thing as employment. I mean, and helping to remove that stigma. Boy, he's an old jailer and nobody want to hire him. He can't even get work in the borough, in a borough council or city corporation. We need, and I think the Emancipation Committee could play a very big role in starting those discussions, implementing those programs and policies, so that now what we have is a welcome. We're welcoming you back, and we are supporting you on your journey as you assimilate back into society. I think that would be impactful.
Thank you, Brother Gordon. Thank you very much.
So for me, the aftercare, that has been my big thing since I've been at YTRC, because you have persons coming out, and as Gerald said, they have no place to go, or you sending them back to the same place. So you arrested this young man for selling drugs at Building B, and then you send them back to Building B where the drugs is still being sold, right? You're setting that youth man up. And one time, a young man, Gerald, was about to leave, and I realized he wasn't ready. I told Mr. Scanterbury, I said, Mr. Scanterbury, he's not ready. Let me keep him back. Mr. Scanterbury smiled, said, empty man, that's illegal.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, but we cannot hold back somebody. But I thought you all could have hold him back. But guess what, Gerald? He was released, and the next time I saw him, Dr. Fergus and Shabaka was in Golden Grove, because he was not ready. That aftercare is important. Emancipation Support Committee, you see that Emancipation Support quiz and that spoken word competition you all have, I think it's in November, from African History Month.
Yeah.
Bring that to the prison. Here why? Quickly. And this will help in reducing crime. We need to know, one, our history did not start on a plantation, and two, despite what society is saying, despite to have the largest population in prisons, African, a lot of Africans made contributions to this country and the world, right? That is why
Trinidadian Africans.
Oh, go listen to Macron. Don't take my words about Trinidadians, from Gonzales, from East Port of Spain, from they need to know that. Right?
Yeah, I think that's the flip side of this whole conversation about all these colonial criminals that we honor on our streets and our statues and so on, is that the people who are buried underneath them are our real heroes, the people who have shown the greatest degree of courage, intelligence, hard work, etc. All the values we want to instill in the young people, the people who did all those things, who demonstrated them at the highest, who distinguished themselves in those areas, they have been deliberately forgotten and ignored instead of being put in front of these young people to inspire them. Brother, we take note of those things. Thank you very much to you both.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night. Yes, and see you next week. And I hope you keep listening and let the inmates in the prison tune in to this program.
Yes,
it's going to help them as well.
Because there's a radio station in the prison.
Yeah, if they could, let them tune in. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, brother. Good night. Good night, doctor.
Yeah, good night, my brother.